What's the most supernatural experience you've ever had? When I was between the ages of 4 to 6, I used to see a little blonde boy through this mirrored armoire in my parents' bedroom. The armoire was big and wooden, but had mirrored accents and mirrors running all the way around the base. If I laid on the carpet in front of it and looked into the mirrors on the bottom, sometimes I'd see a little blonde boy in a red sweater in the corner of the room, far away and a little distorted but still very clear. He would sit with his back to me, looking out the windows to the backyard. I don't remember ever seeing his face. I don't think I saw him many times, but I do remember his image very clearly. In my little kid mind, I thought I invented this super neat mirror trick by myself, so I tried to get my parents to see it too. They always refused, and my mom especially would get super mad at me for asking. I stopped seeing the boy when I stopped playing in their bedroom as much and knew mirrors shouldn't work like that. When I got older, I chalked it up to my overactive kid brain. Didn't think much of it tbh. Years and years later, when I was an adult and long after my parents had sold that house, my mom asked me about the armoire out of the blue, then told me that she used to see the little boy too. Not in the mirrors, but sometimes just out the corners of her eyes. Like she'd be cooking and catch a glimpse of blonde hair pass by her hips, at a kid's height, and occasionally in dreams. It didn't happen too often, but just enough to deeply freak them out. So when I mentioned seeing the same little boy, my mom was just terrified herself. There were other strange stuff in that house, but this was 100% the most vivid I remember. When I was a kid, I spent a lot of time at my grandma's house. Both of my parents worked long hours, so her place became like a second home. She was a tough old woman, rail thin but strong. Sometimes I'd watch her going about her routine and wonder if she was some kind of a witch. She just had a witchy way about her. But of course, that might just be what resourcefulness looks like to a kid. Grandma had this rusty pot-belly stove right smack in the middle of her bedroom. I remember constantly dodging it as I ran through the house playing. At night, she'd load the stove with one great big chunk of hickory, and you could see the flames licking through the cracks. I'd lay on the floor with my sleeping bag, positioning myself so that the stove was in between me and Grandma's bed. Facing this direction meant that I could easily see the window at the foot of her bed. It was like a night light for me. Everything in that house was black at night, unless there was a window nearby. So, there I lay one night. It was chilly, and I remember having trouble sleeping because the moonlight coming through the window was so bright. It was late, which meant the stove wasn't roaring anymore. Besides my grandma's breathing, the whole house was dead silent. It was just the two of us. No one else was in the house. Without any warning, a tall black figure calmly walks from the shadows at the far side of the room. He passed between the stove and bed, across the floor just a foot from my head, and out through the doorway into the kitchen. I was petrified. Couldn't move an inch. This may sound crazy, but had I felt like a burglar was in the house, I'd like to think I would have moved. Or shouted, or something. I didn't think it was a burglar though. No specific reason why. It just felt wrong. I don't think I fell asleep that night. All I remember is staring at the kitchen doorway for a long time. When my grandma woke up, she rolled out of bed and grabbed the fire poker. I sat up and began to tell her what I'd saw. Like I said, I always felt like my grandma was a little bit witchy. After I finished telling her about the tall man, she just poked at the coals in the stove and said, haven't seen him in a long time. When she said she hadn't seen the man in a long time, it did comfort me in a way. I knew Granny was fearless and hardened, but laying there all night, I was afraid that she may herself be frightened once I told her what I saw. She treated it no different than one of her morning chores. Oh, you saw a freaking ghost? Big whoop. My remote once jumped off the TV by itself, the old school box type of television, when I was watching with my girlfriend. Didn't fall or slide off. We actually saw it take a leap as if somebody threw it. We both just sat there being really confused before even questioning it out loud. I used to do pest control. Went to a customer's business for the first time. As I walked in the office, I noticed some pictures that were supposed to be hanging on the wall were on the ground, and then saw some papers which looked like they had been thrown and scattered off a desk. I picked everything up so I could apply treatment to the floorboards and surrounding rooms. I then went to treat the only restroom in the office. I simply knocked on the door as a courtesy, as I always do before entering any restroom. There was no reply, for nobody was in there, so I went and applied treatment to the restroom and I closed the door behind me. As I walked away from the door, I heard somebody grab the door handle, twist it open and open the door. I turned around and looked to see nobody behind me but a door swinging open. The hair on my neck instantly stood up and I put two and two together. I grabbed my shit and ran downstairs. The receptionist saw me and started laughing. She asked me if I had met their little friend upstairs. It was a ghost. She told me she hears it walking around upstairs every day, and they can't keep things on the walls or people's desk. They simply just got used to it. My grandfather loved my grandmother a lot. He would constantly tell her she was beautiful, and would always do embarrassing things to make her laugh. Unfortunately, she died a few months after being diagnosed with cancer. This affected him a lot, but as time went on, he came to terms with it. My grandfather lived on for another 18 years. In his final years, he developed really bad Alzheimer's that led him to forget that his wife had passed away and would often call for her or ask us where she went. We'd explain to him that she had passed away, but it always made him distressed and upset, so we decided to tell him she'll be back soon every time he asked where she was. A month or so before my grandfather passed away, I was at his house with my mother, and we were all sitting in the living room. My grandfather, who was seated on his chair, all of a sudden starts frantically asking us where my grandmother was. We calmly explained to him that she'll be back soon and she was just out doing some chores. Unlike most times, he was being persistent on wanting to see her. We explained to him again that she'll be back soon, but he kept getting more persistent. He started to frantically call for her. He screamed her name as loud as he could over and over again, until out of nowhere every single door and window in the room flung open all at once. Now we could say that it was just wind, but all the doors and windows in the house had secure locks and would stay locked at all times, since my grandfather would wander off or forget to lock his doors. All the doors and windows burst open, and at that same second my grandfather, who was facing the front door, says, "What took you so long? I've been waiting for you," with a smile. My mother and I didn't see the person my grandfather talked to, but I'm sure that he saw his wife. My best friend's dad, who was a second father to me, came to me in a dream and told me to tell my best friend that he loved her and that he was sorry. I woke up to my cell phone ringing to find it was my best friend, absolutely hysterical, telling me that he finally passed away from sclerosis. I sobbed all day. He was a drunk our whole lives, but it still hurt. Wow, this is hard. I know it is. Bacchus, it's happened to me too. My grandpa came to tell he loves me and asked me to be strong at his funeral, because my dad will be completely broken. I never told Dad, because he just won't accept a possibility of anything beyond the ordinary mundane life. More recently, husbands and visited me in a vivid dream, giving me instructions on how to crochet a toy for her future grandkid. When I woke up, it was Emile calling that auntie had passed that night. I will be making that toy now. The baby is due this month. About a year ago, my coworker and I went to get coffee at a new coffee shop that opened up by our work. I was dealing with a lot of anxiety over my future. Anyway, while in line, there was a woman in front of me. She was giving her order when she stopped mid-sentence and looks behind her to see me. She turns back around, gives the barista her order. After I give my order, she comes up to me and, "Hey, I know this is going to sound weird, but do you know a man named Jim?" Her words took me off guard because Jim was my grandpa. He died of cancer. He didn't live in the same state as I did, so I doubt he and this woman would have ever met him. I told her yes, he was my grandpa. And she told me that he wanted me to know that I needed to stop worrying because everything was going to be okay. Me crying in the middle of the coffee store in front of my bewildered coworker and a couple of strangers. She asked if it was alright to give me a hug, which I said yes, and then we shuffled to a more secluded section of the coffee shop and spoke for a bit. She told me that when she was ordering coffee, she heard my grandpa's name inside her head, and he kept demanding that she tell me to stop worrying. The way she put it, he was practically yelling at her. We spoke a lot about what was going on in my life at the time. She was an excellent listener and gave me a lot of encouragement, which I needed. She also did a free tarot card reading for me. I was a rookie cop when my brother committed suicide. He was one of my older siblings, but we were very close. He died in another state, and I had a lot of guilt then about not recognizing the signs. His remains were in bad shape by the time he was discovered, so it was a closed coffin service. About a week after he died, I was back at work one night, and my partner and I see a pimp pistol whipping one of his girls. I jump out, and the pimp sees me and the foot chase was on. I was running after him, gun in hand, and he cuts through a narrow corridor under a building that leads to a courtyard in the middle. Right before I reach the courtyard, I hear, "It's okay," in my dead brother's voice. I hit the courtyard and the guy is against the side pointing a gun at my head and squeezes the trigger twice. I froze for a millisecond and then started beating him in the head with my revolver. Till this day, I don't know why I didn't just shoot him, cuff him and walk him back to the street and find my partner. I tell my partner about him squeezing the trigger, but not the voice I heard. We unload the gun, .32 revolver, right there, and 2 bullets have strike marks on them. Take the gun to the lab for testing. Tell the tech the story. He puts the 2 bullets with strike marks back in and shoots into the test tank. Both bullets fired. What's the most supernatural experience you've ever had? Leave a comment and subscribe to the channel if you want to see more videos like this one.